This is Karen Shaw. I am in my own home in Bloomington, Indiana, with the famous celebrity theremin pianist, the only one in the world, Juliet Shaw, who has consented to this interview to tell us about the rarity of the theremin, an electronic instrument which she has played for many, many years. Hello, Juliet. Welcome to Bloomington.
How happy I am here to tell you about the theremin.
Juliet Shaw is here with me, Karen Shaw, her daughter, in my living room in Bloomington, Indiana, having this interview on November 28th, 1982. Now, Juliet Shaw plays the rare instrument, the theremin, and I'd like to ask you, Mother, when did you first come into contact with the theremin? Where did you find this instrument?
I came into contact with the theremin when I visited in St. Louis, Missouri. Incidentally, I was born in St. Louis, Missouri.
Oh, yes.
And I was visiting at the house of Percy Orthwine, who married into the Clara Bush family. They're all my cousins.
Mm-hmm.
And Percy Orthwine, had one of these theremins. And he said, "Look at my instrument." So I was very interested. He played me a few lines of music on it. And I stepped up and fooled around with it. And then my father, when I got back east to Connecticut, immediately went to RCA and bought for me one of the first 1,000 theremins that was ever put out. Leon Theremin came over to this country in 1928 with his first theremin, which was like a box that it was larger than the ones they make now. It sat on a table, and it was a brown color finish. The ones they have now are like mine, the ebony black. But Leon Theremin had this instrument, and he expected to make himself a millionaire when he came over to this country. He came on the ship with my teacher, Harold Bauer, who got to know him quite well. After he arrived in New York, John Wanamaker offered him $10,000 a year to launch him as a musician, wanted to have him study with the finest musicians, because Leon Theremin was a top physicist, but he was not a top musician.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, $10,000 a year. He said, "I want $10,000 a concert." Whereupon he got some very wealthy people, including Lucy Bigelow Rosen, who left the estate of Carmore for artistic purposes in New York State. And she helped launch him with this huge Carnegie Hall concert, which he gave to demonstrate the theremin, which was the predecessor of any other electronic instrument, including the Moog and the synthesizer.
Now,
and
what year was this?
Organ.
What year was this that Theremin gave this concert in New York? Do you know?
I think it was. I didn't know about it at that time. I didn't find out about it till 1935. But I think he gave it in 1928. He came over here in 1928 and gave the concert soon after that. It might have been 1929. Present at his concert was Stokowski, also Kusevitsky was there, Sokolov, quite a number of very prominent
Russian
composers
and musical figures.
Conductors. And they recognized that it was a new era of electronic music, because never before had anyone produced musical tones by just playing on electronic airwaves.
Yes, well, could you describe how this electronical process works when you play the theremin? Incidentally, it plays only one melodic line. Is that not so?
Yes, like the human voice,
I see.
Or like a violin. And it sounds like a human voice up high. Sometimes down low it sounds like a cello.
Describe the appearance of this instrument.
I will in just a moment, but I wanted to tell you that Mr. Theremin himself said it was as indescribable has the flavor of a cantaloupe. He used to say that. It was as indescribable as the flavor of a cantaloupe.
That's an interesting analogy.
It has an antenna going high in the air on opposite your right hand, and in the left hand another antenna, which is in the form of a loop. As you approach the antenna that stands in the air on the right, that gives you the intonation. It's like an imaginary scale right in the air. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. It goes 6.5 octaves.
Now, when you say it gives you the intonation, you mean that
you put your
that
hand
as you go toward the rod, the pitch goes upward.
Goes down.
I see.
Now, the left hand is the sense of nuance and shades the melodic line, and also controls the quality of the sound that you're getting with the right hand, because it's like you do a vibrato on a cello, or when you're playing the piano, a sense of intensity to diversify the tone. It's all done with the left hand intensity, which people don't realize how important that is.
Now that controls the volume too, doesn't it?
It controls
How does
the
that
volume.
work?
And that, as you raise your hand up away from the antenna, it gets louder, and as you put it down toward the antenna, it gets softer. And if you jerk your hand simultaneously with getting the notes with the right hand, it performs staccato. And Leon Theremin did not invent that on the instrument. Joseph Hoffman, the famous pianist, invented that.
Oh.
I know that to be a fact because I was at a dinner party with him one night and asked him. And he told me that making inventions was his favorite pastime. He did it as a hobby, and he had...
Did he own a theremin?
No, but I think he knew some people who did.
I thought he was one of the buyers of the original production of theremins in the United States.
No, Charlie Chaplin
Who
was
bought these
one.
instruments?
Charlie Chaplin bought one. Douglas Fairbanks bought one.
Oh.
A Maharaja bought one. And I
Interesting.
bought one. And
Did you buy the 2-octave original?
the original ones went 2.5 octaves.
2.5 octaves.
And that's what I originally had. Then I went to New York. At the time that I went down to New York to Leon Theremin to get him to advise me on the instrument and study with him as much as he could tell me, he was a very attractive young man, slender, very good looking, with dark hair, and took my instrument and I played it to him, and he said, "Why, you play this instrument very well. Who taught you to play it?" And I said, "Well, I really picked it up myself because I'm a musician, I'm a pianist." And he said, "Well, anyone who plays it like you, if you could play it in concert, I could build you one that goes 6.5 octaves. So I traded in my first one and had him build me one that goes 6.5 octaves. However, he taught me a very valuable thing about how to tune a theremin in so that the spacing in the right hand would always be the same. If you keep it tuned to a certain set of vibrations, in my case, I tune it to G always. Then the spacing in the right hand will always be the same distance, so you know if you're doing an octave just how far to go. There's certain exercises I take for that spacing. Do you want me to tell you what they are?
Well, it's the most amazing thing that you are able to jump around in the air and hit a particular pitch for which you aim.
Well,
How did you come upon this technique? I don't know anyone else who plays this instrument, so the technique is not very well known.
Well, I've developed more or less my own technique, but when I hit it in space, if you're playing in front of a symphony orchestra, and then you have to bring in your note, it's very difficult to just put your note like this up in the air, your hand up in the air, and come out with the right note. But there's a secret to how I do it. I have an idea, vague idea, where that note might be, and then I sense it very quickly with the sensitivity of my left hand, and when I hear it faintly, then I come out louder on it, and that's how I get my pitch. And then once you get the first pitch, everything else is relative.
Yes, of course. This is not unlike the technique of a violinist
similar.
or in finding the exact
Very
pitch, the
similar. Or a
intonation.
singer. When you sing a note, how do you know where the note is? I mean, It's done a great deal with your ear, actually.
Yes. Well, how do you get the vibrato?
The vibrato, if you know how to do a vibrato on a violin or a cello, or even to bring out the nuance of a very good tone quality on the piano, to press on the melody, you do it the same way, but you do it inside, your muscles inside, and you do it on airwaves. And I tell you, it's just feeling a degree of intensity within yourself that creates that tone quality.
Because you seem to have a lovely vibrato on it. It's not too fast and it's not too slow.
It's just something you feel within yourself.
It's something, for example, like a string player develops a vibrato, a certain
Right.
speed of vibrato in the left hand.
It's a feeling you get for it. When I practice, I do not practice with a vibrato. I practice just plain notes.
Oh, you don't?
Do, re, mi, fa, sol, like that. Or do, mi, re, fa, mi, sol, la. You practice without the vibrato, but when you play, you put it in because that's the quintessence of the polish.
Yes, of course. Of course, sometimes if it goes at a certain speed, you don't use the vibrato. You approach music the way it should be done.
Well, for instance, if you're doing the César violin sonata, say the first movement that goes
Yes.
da 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 da. You vibrato on the long notes, but not on the short notes.
Yes.
Like
now, when you're speaking of repertoire now, where do you get the repertoire that you perform on this instrument? Is there anything written originally for the theremin that you play?
Well, I have played the first and only airphonic suite written in the world, which was written by the famous teacher and composer Joseph Schillinger, who was a close friend of Leon Theremin's. He wrote an airphonic suite which was performed as solos with a large symphony orchestra, Sokolov, conducting it. It was performed in 1929, and I was asked to perform it with the Civic Orchestra in New Haven last season. We had to get permission from Mrs. Schillinger, who lives in New York City and is the widow of Joseph Schillinger, to obtain this piece of music out of the archives of the Fleischer Museum in Philadelphia.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
And so we presented it, and it was the first time it had been played in 50 years. If I do say so, I think my interpretation of it must have been quite interesting, because whereas when Schillinger composed this, the theremin he used it on only went 2.5 octaves. Mine went 6.5 octaves, so many places I could place the melody very high above the orchestra, which would show it off very beautifully. Incidentally, speaking of orchestras and theremin, Stokowski was very interested in using the theremin with the Philadelphia Symphony Orchestra.
Oh.
Even as part of the orchestra, not only as soloist, but as part of the orchestra.
Did he ever present it as a solo instrument?
Oh, I think quite a number of times. I didn't know the instrument at that time. I wasn't old enough.
Mm-hmm. Well, this would be in the archives somewhere if this could be documented, perhaps.
Yes.
Well, what repertoire do you use then, other than these original pieces? For example, you've mentioned only one by Joseph Schillinger. Are there other original pieces for the theremin?
Well,
For either solo with piano accompaniment, or for theremin and orchestra, or do you arrange your own
a few
things?
composers have written things for me to play with the theremin. One lady wrote a nocturne for me to play with symphony orchestra and theremin as soloist, Madame Gisela Selden Goff. And she now I think has passed on. I've never performed it yet. All this happened simultaneously, although I own the music. But other things are things I've arranged myself and had someone put down to play with symphony orchestra.
What is the repertoire you've arranged for this instrument?
Well, the first
what suits
piece,
it very well?
Well, an etude for cello, original etude for cello by Nadia Boulanger is the first thing I ever played in public. I also played the pavane from the Marmelle Roy of Ravel in public. A simple, sweet melody like that is very lovely. And the Debussy songs, I love some of his songs, such as Bonsoir, and I love the song of Poulenc called C'est.
That's a beautiful melody.
And I
Beautiful.
have played in churches like the Bach Gounod Ave Maria, the Schubert Ave Maria.
Beautiful.
And it's very lovely. For two pianos, I've arranged with the help of my daughter, Sandra Shaw, Tears by Rachmaninoff, played for two pianos, and Theremin. I've arranged Clair de Lune of Debussy, and
The Fire Dance.
the Fire Dance.
Very interesting version of that.
I have a beautiful arrangement of that Etude de Boulanger for symphony orchestra, and I have arranged quite a number. I've played with symphony orchestra quite a number of times. One of the most interesting things that the public loves is the Swan of Saint-Saëns. I've arranged that.
I've also heard you perform many times Gershwin's
Oh, yes.
Summertime, which is very
Gershwin's
touching.
Summertime, and incidentally, while we're on the subject of that, Porgy and Bess was originally Joseph Schillinger's idea, not Gershwin's idea. That is what Mrs. Schillinger recently told me.
Oh, that's interesting.
Gershwin carried it out, but with the help of Schillinger, but it was originally Schillinger's idea.
Well, that's very interesting. Now, to get back to your first discovery of the theremin in Missouri,
Yes.
what year was this again?
1933.
1933. And it belonged to the Bush family
Yes.
there? How did you transport? And so you bought one from them? Or
No,
where did
no,
you acquire the instrument?
That was when RCA had put out 1,000 of them. Leon Theremin sold his patent to RCA
Oh,
for, I believe it was $280,000,
I see.
which in those days was considered big money.
Yes.
And RCA manufactured only 1,000 of them. And those are the first ones that came out for 2.5 octaves. After Leon Theremin built mine 6.5 octaves, I've always been sorry I didn't keep the first original one I had, because I loved the tone of it. The first one was only one current, AC, but the second one is AC, DC. And when I first played my first Theremin concert in public at Yale University at a concert that I was giving, which was contrasting Bach, such as the Chromatic Fantasy and Fugue, I know I started the program with that, with contemporary music, I thought how interesting it would be to have a contemporary instrument as well as contemporary music, because I was playing some of Henry Cowell's music on my elbows in tone clusters. So that's why I really began to learn to play the theremin, to demonstrate these college
Lecture recitals.
recitals. And so when I arrived for the recital on a Sunday afternoon, all the boys at Yale University that had anything to do with the concert were on ladders up on the telegraph poles, changing the electric wiring to the kind of current that the theremin had, because it was not the right kind of current. When I told that to Mr. Theremin later on, he made it go either current, AC or DC. But the original ones did not do both.
Interesting.
So that was quite interesting to see the boys up on the step ladders getting ready for the Theremin concert. And although I'd played a very fine program, music on my elbows and so forth at this concert, in the newspaper the next day, people were crazy about the Theremin. They had never heard about it before. And it was the first time I had ever played it in public, and I do not do it as a stunt. I do it as a serious musical instrument. And it's really quite hard to play, because if you get your hand one fraction of an inch out of the right place where that spacing is, why, it would go off tune. And
well, it's very difficult to pluck notes out of space, but I understand what you mean. You have a relationship. Once you understand you've practiced it a certain way, there's a certain relationship that you strive to retain
when you really
between the pitches. Is this
right?
correct?
And when you really figure out music is only spacing anyway, because when you're doing a piano composition and you have a big jump 4 octaves up, you just do it and your hand just goes automatically to that spot. And after you do it enough times, it happens by itself, and that's the way the theremin is.
I think probably the theremin is a little more difficult to hit the right note than on the piano. And again, you haven't got the problem of intonation on the piano.
That's right.
That you have on the theremin or a stringed instrument.
That's right.
Right?
And it's, it's really very hard to play a theremin. It has to come within your soul. You have to be utterly poised inside. You can't be at all nervous at all. You have to be very poised to play a theremin. And as you get into the music, it gets better and better. It's always like that. It's easier to play after you get started and play a long time than it is just getting up and playing a few lines.
Yes, well, that's understandable.
But that's true with any music.
That's true with all kinds of performers on all kinds of instruments, because they're a little less relaxed at the beginning of a performance. They might be nervous at the beginning of a performance.
One of the most interesting pieces I've ever played, I played with the Greenwich Philharmonia when Quinto Maganini was conducting. And it was the Chanson Perpetuelle of Chausson, which is originally written for soprano and piano quintet. So I got them to quadruple the violins and the violas and the quartet, to quadruple it. And then I took the soprano solo part and adapted it to the theremin, and it's really very beautiful music.
Oh, it must be. Well, tell me, where do you stand exactly? Do you try and stand the same distance from the instrument each time when you play it, or can you?
No, I just do what's convenient. I just stand in front of it. When I tune it, I have my knee on the instrument, because you have to tune it to the vibrations in your own body. Now, Leon Theremin taught me that himself. I never knew that before.
How did you decide to tune it to G? Is that the G below middle C?
Well, Leon Theremin and I experimented with it, and he said he thought that was a good thing for me, so I've done it that way ever since.
Because the range is really quite incredible for a melodic instrument. 6.5 octaves is an incredible range, when you think that the human voice only has approximately 2 to 2.5 octave range.
That's right.
It's an extraordinary range.
Flute only has 2.5. One of the lovely things about a theremin is you can take a note very high and you can get very exquisite pianissimi on it.
You mean the nuance of the human voice? For example, a soprano practices coming from a very pianissimo tone to swelling the tone.
Yes.
And the theremin does that very, very beautifully.
Yes, and you can hold it indefinitely. As Paul Bernard, a very top violinist, said to me once, you can't hold a note as long on a violin as you can a theremin, because you give out of bowing capacity.
That's right. Or the human voice, you have to breathe.
The human voice, you have to breathe, but the theremin, you can hold a note as long as you want to. And the high pianissimo notes, especially on the instrument that Leon Theremin made for me, are very beautiful to listen to.
How do you keep from sliding from note to note? How do you articulate
the note? What Hoffman invented with the left hand. It's done with the left hand. Every time you do a note with the right hand, which is the intonation, you at the same time do a note movement with your left hand, so that separates
it brings it to stoppage almost in between, doesn't it?
Yes, it makes each note. It helps your articulation.
It separates the notes
to make everything be very articulate.
Uh-huh.
My instrument does play staccato, but I don't think staccato is. I play some notes staccato, but I prefer a portamento on my instrument. Mm-hmm. But I don't think staccato is its best medium. I think a melodic line is its best medium. And I've also studied singing when I was younger for quite a number of years, and learned a lot about shading a melodic line. So that has helped in my study of the theremin too.
Of course. Perhaps the long, brooding melodic line suits the instrument better than any other type of music. For example, the French songs and the long Russian melodies.
Oh, Russian music is great on the theremin.
I wonder if the invention, since this was a Russian physicist, if he had in mind that this instrument would create these types of melodies at all when he wrote it. I don't know.
Well, I don't know. I've made some interesting arrangements. I've done the toccata of Khachaturian, which I've played on the theremin, because it's very good on a melodic line, because if you bring, on a chromatic scale, if you bring your hand right down from the top of the instrument down towards your body, you have a perfect chromatic scale, just bringing your arm down there, for 6.5 octaves, and it does very beautiful trills too. You can do a beautiful trill on it.
Well, sometimes I see your right hand working almost a similar way as playing the piano.
Well, that's because I'm a pianist.
Do you kind of finger the notes in the air?
Yes, I do. But Leon Theremin didn't do that. He always kept a fist on it and did it with his arm.
I think that's less effective than the way you do it.
I do it both ways. I sometimes intensify it with, on a low note that I want to bring out, I intensify it with making a fist. But otherwise, I do sort of individual notes. I picture it as a piano keyboard in the air, imaginary piano keyboard. And I finger it the way I would a piano keyboard.
And you really believe that it produces more intensity in the tone by making your hand more intense?
I know it does. And when you make a fist with your right hand, it produces intensity, and you accentuate it again with getting intensity in the inner feeling of your left hand.
It's an electronic field.
Yes.
So no one can, you can't have any movement around it while you're playing it,
No, the electromagnetic field goes, I don't like anyone to sit within 10 feet of where I am.
10 feet.
That's my own feeling about it, because if someone walks across in front of it while you're playing, the contact of their body on the electromagnetic field would put the thing off.
I wonder if it's a similar, the electric eye that's used to going in and out of doors.
It is exactly the same thing.
Is that the same principle,
yes.
I wonder?
In fact, years ago when Leon Theremin first invented this, I think it was Macy's in New York, had a display window with the beams of the theremin coming out from the display window, and as people walked by, some sounds came out. I have a newspaper article about that at home. It was quite interesting to me.
How do you maintain this instrument? Do you have anyone who can...
Well, tell the truth, when I first bought the one from RCA, I really had a lot of trouble with it. And it discouraged me. I was living within an hour's trip of New York, and I used to have to take it to New York all the time to get it fixed. But after I took this one to New York, which was the one I bought at RCA, and played it to Leon Theremin, and then he made me another one. And I traded that in, for which I'm sorry, as I said before. I'm sorry I didn't keep that original one just as a relic. I wrote to RCA and told them that I wondered if they could refer me to an electrical engineer who could service my theremin, and to my surprise they wrote back to me and said there was one right in my own town that was wonderful, and his name was Alexander Gibson. So I called him over, and he said he would, he said he was very interested in the theremin, and I left it in his hands to look mine over and see what it needed. So my husband and I went to New York, and when we came back from New York that day, there was Alex Gibson, my whole large living room. He had the theremin all in pieces, lying all over the whole floor of the living room.
My goodness.
And I said to him,
what kinds of pieces are inside the theremin?
Well,
what's inside there?
Thousands of wires and little tubes and all kinds of things. Very intricate.
They must be the old type of tubes.
They are. I have an extra set.
How do you replace them? I see.
I have an extra set of them, but let me tell you, I said to my husband, well, this is either the beginning or the end of this instrument. But what he did was he took it all apart, he made blueprints of it, which I have, and put it back together again. And you may not believe it, but since that day, which is over 30 years ago, might even be 40 years ago, it's never had anything go wrong with it. He also showed me a little trick. There's always something that goes wrong with it about the tuning. He showed me how to correct that myself, and I'm so thankful he did, because he has since died. And if I didn't know that little trick of how to tune it when it gets, when it hasn't been used for a long time, or when it stands in too cold a room too long time, you have to take a little screwdriver and do something to it in the back, which I know how to do personally.
Let's see, it has its own speaker built in.
Yes, but I use two other speakers.
You amplify it.
I amplify it.
You attach two amplifiers. And so it has as much projection as you wish it to have.
Yes.
Then.
I'd amplify it, and it's funny, but the larger the auditorium, the more beautiful it sounds. It seems to go into space, sort of.
Yes.
And I have played it with 2 piano accompaniment. I've even played it with 12 piano accompaniment. I'm the only one in the world who's played it either with 2 piano or 12 piano accompaniment.
12 piano accompaniment? Now, do tell me about this 12
Well,
pianos. How do you have 12 pianos accompany you at one time?
I put on a very big 12 piano show. The last one we put on, I took in $10,500 in one evening.
My goodness. That's
And
terrific.
I created some of my pieces to go with the 12 piano accompaniment.
Well, you've created arrangements for 12 pianos.
Yes.
Yes, I've seen your 12 piano and participated in it once. I think it's
One
a marvelous thing.
One of the good arrangements that I've done with 12 pianos was the pantomime of the fire.
Oh.
Very interesting because it has long notes that you hold a long time, and then the background comes against it with the pianos.
That's with the theremin and
Yes.
12 piano accompaniment.
Another way that is very effective is on Negro spirituals.
Oh, yes.
If you have a choir group, sing a cappella an accompaniment and put a plaintive Negro melody against it. It is utterly beautiful. Another thing I've done is play it in church. I've put on a robe, a big robe like they wear on the pulpits at church, and I've played Ave Maria and different things that were so spiritual that one man that said he was just passing through from Virginia, he didn't go to that church, but he said he'd never been carried so near to heaven before as he had listening, and we played that theremin along with an organ and a soprano singer, which we alternated on the melodies, and then I played an obligato, and it really is very spiritual and uplifting. In fact, I'm thinking right now of making a spiritual recording.
I think that would be a wonderful idea. Didn't you give a debut performance on the instrument yourself at one time in
In New York City.
When was this?
It was, well, I know when it was. It was when the World War broke out on
The Second
December
World War.
7th in when they blew up all the ships.
1941?
Yes, 1941.
Oh my, that was a shame.
And I went, it was in the...
That interrupted many a career.
Well, it was, I had a manager, his name was Speller, and he wanted me to have a big debut in New York. So he owned a theater then called the Concert Theater. It's still there in New York. I think they show motion pictures, and it's on the corner of 58th Street down in
57th Street.
57th Street.
57th Street and 8th Avenue.
Yes.
Yes, I know the theater.
And so I went by just a couple of days before my concert and saw my name way up in big letters on the marquee there. And then the war broke out, and they turned out all the lights in New York because they were afraid they would get bombed. But we went right on with the concert, lights or no lights in New York. Everything was pitch dark that night. We had the concert just the same. And
how did you have the electricity for it?
They didn't turn off the lights inside the buildings. They just turned off all those bright marquee lights, and like those lights down on Times Square. They turned off all those lights because they didn't know what the Japanese were going to do next. They didn't know what they might come and bomb New York.
Well, this is a highly unusual instrument. Do you feel that it's a practical instrument to concertize on, or?
No, it's practical, but it's hard to transport.
I see.
It's practical. It's very dependable. My instrument has some special bulbs that this electronic expert put on in case anything a tube should go bad. It lights a certain way so you can immediately see which one it is and take it out. Because I was present at a concert once years ago where Clara Rockmore, who also is a very good theremin player, she's Robert Sherman's aunt, she was giving a program in Carnegie Hall, and something happened to one of her tubes, and they had to stop the concert. And she cried and cried and cried about it. But this wouldn't...
disappointing.
This would never happen to mine because I can tell on moment's notice which tube it would be, and I always carry an extra set of tubes. But to tell the truth, Mr. Gibson fixed my instrument so well. He said that he had cemented it up in places where he felt the wiring hadn't been made as accurately as it should be. But in 30 years, I've never had any trouble with it.
Marvelous.
So that's about the story.
Well, thank you, Juliet Shaw, on this November day, and it's been a pleasure having you visit me for Thanksgiving holidays.
Well, I've had a marvelous time, and thank you.